Here we go. Welcome, everyone, to my next installment of my podcast. Let's talk horses, life, and living. And I'm so excited about my guest this week. Oh, my God. We've been trying to do this for a little while, and you're definitely one of the people, Cody, that I've been hoping to have on here for a while. So thank you so much for making time for me, and welcome to the podcast, Cody Lore.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So I usually, because you're you're the first time of being on my podcast, the first thing I like to ask my guests is, how did horses come into your life? Where did it all begin?
Well, I've had horses my entire life. My dad had horses growing up, and the first time I was ever on the back of a horse, I was 5 days old. My mom was in the house taking a nap, and my dad was tired of sitting in the house, so he scooped me up and threw a saddle on a horse and took me with him.
Oh,
And
wow.
I've been on the back of one ever since.
And so where did you grow up? Like what part of, because you're American, obviously, what part of America
Yes.
did you grow up in?
Well, we kind of bounced around, when I was younger, we didn't come from very much. And so we bounced around just a little bit of everywhere. We lived all over Texas, Indiana, New Mexico, Oklahoma. I don't think we ever stayed in one spot very long. And then uh, when I guess I was about 11, my dad started leasing a place here in Brenham, just about 45 minutes northwest of Houston.
Yep.
And so from then till he got sick, we lived in Brenham. And then when he got sick, I bounced around. And then it's always kind of called me back here. So this is where I'll probably be forever.
That's awesome. And so what did your dad do? Was his like work with horses? Was that his living or?
Yeah, well, so when I was younger, he kind of had different odd jobs, but we've always had horses. He'd always buy and sell horses. Like you'd just kind of call him a horse trader. He'd go to the sale barns and buy horses, and we'd get, he'd never buy good ones. It was always the cheapest ones that went through the sale barn. So, on Saturday night, he'd buy them, and Sunday morning, he'd be like, okay, here's your new project. Get on it and let's figure it out. And most of them weren't halter broke, and usually by Sunday afternoon, we were riding them. And
Wow.
so we did that forever. And then when we moved to the Brenham area, my dad started shooting horses full time. He always shot horses as a part time gig, and then he decided to start doing it full time, and just kind of kept going from there. And then we would just start buying a lot of horses and selling horses. And he always bought teams, and we, would train mules to drive, horses to drive, stuff like that, and just kind of fiddled with a little bit of all of it.
Wow. I feel like there's so much information in those few sentences that you just said. So I just want to pick apart a little bit of that. So you were his firstborn son, right? Like you were the
No,
first
no.
one. Yep.
Actually, I have a half brother that's 11 years older than I am,
Uh-huh.
and he has stuff to do with horses, and he rides. But I was always my dad's go to. Like my stuck in my dad's hip from the time I could walk till the day that he passed away. Like if I could be around him, I was, and
Oh,
it was always just. He called me Homer. That was my nickname, and he'd be like, "Oh, Homer will do it. Just throw me on somebody's horse. We'd be somewhere, and horse be bucking and or running off or doing something stupid. And he'd just throw me on it and say, "Here, you ride his horse. He'll ride yours." And so
wow.
it just
Wow. And so like when you created this relationship with him, like you started from a very young age riding these horses for
oh
him, or
yeah, oh
what are
yeah. I
we
mean, I
talking?
can remember being 5 or 6 years old and getting on horses. He at that point, he would do a lot of the work, get them ready, and then I'd be the crash dummy. He'd throw me on their back and say, "Hold on," and he'd lunge them around and get them where they're moving off of my feet and stuff, and then we just kind of go from there.
And what do you think, like, because a lot of people would be like, oh my God. And there's so many different ways people raise their children. There's so many different ways that we raise our animals and everything. But what was that like for you? Like, was it something that you
Oh,
just always trusted that whatever
oh
happened?
yeah.
Because I'm assuming you never wore a helmet, right? Like that wasn't a
No,
thing.
no, no. I mean, there were several times like we would go do things like go to national forest and ride and do trail rides and different events and stuff, and people would be like, "Oh, that kid needs a helmet," and my dad's like, "No, he don't. He's fine." And so I've never wore a helmet, never, and I never doubted it. If my dad told me that it was good to go, it was, I took that as word and we went.
Yeah.
And
And
I think part of it was, because my dad's always been my hero. And so,
yeah.
you always want to live up to that. So, if he asked me to do it, I was going to do it, whether I was ready for it or not. I always answered the call.
Wow. And like, were there any moments where shit went terribly awry, or
Oh,
did it always?
yeah, more times than it didn't, actually. I mean, there was several times. I mean, I can remember a time he bought an Arabian horse from the sale barn. And
Uh-huh.
I don't think he gave very much for this. He might have give $100 for this horse. And the people are like, yeah, when we bought him, because they bought him at a sale barn, they're like, yeah, they rode him through. And, every time we try to get on him, he bucks us off or does this. And so Dad was like, hey, we're going to buy that horse and you're going to ride him tomorrow. I was like, all right, whatever. And so we got him home, and uh, I saddled him that night when we got him home. And I was like, all right, buddy, here's you a bucket of water and a hay bag. You're going to stand here all night saddled. And I'm going to get on you in the morning. We're going to figure this out. And he had a really bad habit. What he'd do is, as soon as you put weight in the stirrup, he'd flip over backwards.
That is a bad
And
habit. Yeah.
and
That's pretty
so
bad.
and I get pretty determined when those things. I'm like, no, we're gonna fix this. And so, I mean, I spent probably 6 days, broke 4 saddles,
Wow.
and my dad was like, "We're done. We're not messing with this anymore. This horse has already cost me more money than he's ever gonna make, because now we got to replace the saddles." And so we took the horse back to the sale barn, told the people, "Hey, look, this horse is an outlaw. He's had some kind of something's happened to him in his past that he does not like being rode." And one guy, of course, he was being a smartass out in the crowd. He said, "Well, does he ride bareback?" And my dad said, "Well, I don't know." And he grabbed me by my belt loop and threw me up on the horse, and rode around in the ring like he'd been rode every day of his life. Never had a trouble. And it was one of those moments where it's like, well, Dad said to do it. Here we go.
Wow. And it's so interesting. Like, even I mean, we've spent a bit of time together around horses, and I've seen that determination come out in you before. And it's so funny. I just
Yes.
will insert this little story. This morning we went riding here. I'm still in Ellegar. You were here. We facilitated a class together with Alison Cox recently. And so there's a lot of horse riding that goes on here, right? And as you know, like
Yes.
Simone, our good friend, is also here with her horse. And we took her over the other side, and we've been riding on Ellen Canto with Pluma is over there. And Pluma's just like a kid in a candy store. She's wild because she's been in her stall and only really ridden in the small trails of the resort. And I just hear Simone going, "No, I'm channeling Cody here. You're not going to get away with that." Like, I hear the determination that you have with
That's
horses
awesome.
come through with her, and it's so good. It's so good, this influence that you have on people. And I've had the fortune of spending time with you and getting to facilitate a couple of these classes now, and seeing how you are with horses, but also like the real skill you have with people, like where people take what you say, and maybe it came from your dad, like maybe having that influence from such a young age from someone that was just so certain about things, and whether he was certain or not, he came across that way, like, this is
Yes.
what we're doing, we're determined, we're going there, and it comes through. And I think, I'm sure as a horse trainer it's a great thing, but as a people trainer as well, like it's so cool to see how much people will follow basically whatever you say as well. So obviously you've got a fair bit of your dad in you too.
Absolutely.
Um, so well, maybe we'll fast forward a little bit here, because how and when did you meet Gary Douglas? So Gary Douglas is the founder of Access Consciousness. If you used to listen to my podcast before I changed it, we talked a lot about access consciousness. It's kind of what I do for a living. And, Cody met Gary at some point. I would love to hear that story and just hear a little bit about, because now you manage his ranch in south of Houston, right?
Yeah. Northwest of Houston.
Northwest. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that story. How did Gary Douglas come into your life?
Well, so Gary had a young guy named Lane that worked for him, running the ranch originally. And I shot horses for a living. I was kind of going through a rough patch in life and was shooting horses and kind of bouncing around from place to place. And it finally started, where my shoeing business was back to taking off, and we were getting busy. And Lane had called me. He'd got my number from mutual friend, and he's like, hey, I need, the ranch horses shod. Can you come do it? And so I was like, yeah. So I started doing the ranch horses, and I shod the ranch horses for 6 months, and never met Gary, never met Dane. I'd show up and I would tell Lane, hey, these are the horses on my list this week, and I'm going to come do them. And I'd go do the horses, and they'd have a check waiting for me there. And, me and Lane ended up becoming buddies. And so we hung out a little bit and stuff. And one day he calls me. I was down the road shoeing some horses, and he calls me and says, hey, I need your help. He said, I'm in a bind. He said, I took Gary and another lady riding, and the one horse ran off, and the headstall on Gary's horse broke at the same time. He said, so I've got horses running everywhere. He's like, they're all studs. He said, it's a bad deal. And he said, they're trying to jump the fence to get to the mares. And I was like, okay, I, got out from underneath the horse I was shoeing, and I told the people, I said, I'll be right back. I got to run down the road. And so I came here and helped him get the horses caught, met Gary and met Miss Nancy O'Connor, and just kind of got to talking to him. And Nancy had sent Lane a horse for Lane to start riding, and kind of the story I got was the horse was already broke, but he was kind of wild. He was a little black stud Peruvian stud horse, and Lane was like, man, he's like, I can't get on this horse. He said he's bad. He's like, every time I try to get on him, he kicks at me, he bites at me. He's like, and she's wanting to see me ride him. And I was like, all right, let's go over here real quick. And so we went and got the stud out of the stalls, and I started messing with him, lunging him around, and just kind of getting where he's really kind of paying attention and being connected to me, and kind of being curious of what I'm asking of him, not really caring about anything else. And I spent about 20 minutes working with him, and we got the saddle put on him, and I told Lane, okay, get up there. And Lane got like deer in the headlights. His eyes got real big, and he's like, what do you mean? I said, get on the horse. He's ready for you. He said, no, there's no way. He's like, you hadn't done nothing with him. I said, he's fine. Just get on him. And so Lane come over there, and I got Lane up on him, and we started lunging him. And, he wanted to kind of buck around and be a little goofy. And so I just kept changing directions on him and, taking his mind off of it. And after about 5 circles, the horse, relaxed, and Lane kind of got to riding him and pulling him around and letting him see where he wanted. And I walked over and I unclipped the leader up and said, here you go, Lane, he's yours. And, of course, Lane was like, what do you mean? He's kind of freaking out. And I was like, man, he's fine. He'll be fine. And so Lane started riding him, and he's like, man, this horse don't ride too bad. And I was like, yeah, you just have to get him to pay attention to you, because he's not. He's more worried about all the mares and everything else going on. And so we got done with that, and Gary pulled me to the side, and he says, hey, do you want a job? And I was like, no, sir, not really. And he's like, what do you mean? I said, I have a job. I said, I like what I do. And I said, things are finally going my way, and I really like what I'm doing. And he's like, oh, okay. And he got my number from me that day. And I don't know, he called me about every day for 6 weeks. And he was like, hey, you want to take that job yet? And I was like, no, sir, I don't. And, he called me every day. I could almost set my watch to when he was going to call me, because, he was pretty determined that I was going to come to work for him. And so we go back and forth, and, I'm like, no, no, no. And one week, of course, time close to the end of the year, the shoeing business gets a little scarce, because everybody quits taking care of their horse, because now Christmas is coming, New Year's is coming. They want to, be able to have that money for that. And so I had like 4 or 5 people cancel that week on me. And, I was like, how am I going to pay my bills? And Gary called, and he's like, are you sure you don't want to come from work for me? This is going to be the last time I ask you. And I'm like, I really don't. I said, but I don't. And I told him, I said, at that time, he had 70 acres and 10 horses and like 3 cows. And I told him, I said, I don't see you justifying paying me what I have to leave what I'm doing to come take care of your ranch. He said, I didn't ask if I could fucking afford you. I asked if you wanted a job. And I was like, oh, okay. And I told him, and he's like, give me a number. He's like, just think of a number. Tell me what you want. And, let's see if we can even get close. And I said, okay. So I told him, I said, hey, I want to make this much a year. I said, I've been looking at trying to find a place to live, a new rent house. I said, I'd like to move to the ranch. And I said, I'm working on buying a new truck. I want a new truck. He said, deal. You start Monday. He said, here's a lady's phone number. Call her when you find a truck. She'll transfer the money to the dealership so the truck's paid for, and we'll figure out the payments between the two of us.
Mm.
And so, I started scrambling around, and I told him, I said, look, I said, I have clients that have been with me for a couple of years now. I'm not just going to call them and say, hey, I'm not shoeing your horses anymore. And so he was, very lenient with me and let me kind of keep doing horses, in the afternoons and kind of finding other people to do the horses for people. And, it just worked out. And I'm so glad I did, because it has changed my life. I've been places I never thought that I was going to be, and, you know, had given opportunities that I never would have dreamed of. And now, it's a reality. And so it sure changed a lot for me.
And I just think that's so cool. Like, because anyone that hangs around Gary for any amount of time, you just learn things. Like, he's the sort of guy that you just constantly like, oh, you see things obviously very completely different to everyone else. But I love that. Like, within like your first few conversations, he's asking you, and you're like, well, I don't think you can afford me.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, hang on a second, because that was never my question. That was
Yeah.
never the conversation.
And I've learned with Gary, if you tell him he can't afford something, by God, he's gonna have it. Because
Okay,
he's like,
that's a good
okay, I'll
like,
prove you wrong. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And what year was that? How long are we talking now?
Ooh, that would have been um early 2016. So
Yeah,
going on 9 years now.
cool. And in that time, a lot's changed, huh?
A lot has changed. Yes.
Yeah. And let me just talk quickly then about this ranch. So the ranch that Cody's talking about, what did you say when you first started working for him? It was 70 acres and 10
70
horses?
acres. Yes.
And just quickly, one question about the story you were telling about the Peruvian stud. Had you worked with that breed of horse before? Like, is that a common breed in the United States, or?
Yes, there's a lot of them, but I hadn't really worked with a lot of them. I mainly, did quarter horse, paint horses, and then, my dad had mules and draft
Yeah,
horses, and and we had a couple of them come through, here and there. Dad buy them at the sale barn because they were cheap, and you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
something that we did to kind of make it easy. So we definitely learned how to work with several different breeds, and just I've kind of learned that every horse kind of learns the same way. If you really just take your time and figure out what the horse actually is willing to learn and how they're willing to learn. I mean, they're just like us. There's so many different ways to teach somebody. Like, some people are visual learners, some of them are hands on. As horses are the same way. So some
yeah.
respond to, hey, the pressure here and taking this here. And, you know, some people like giving treats. I'm not a big, oh, I'm going to give you a cookie every time you take a step forward. But hey, if it gets it done, it doesn't matter. As long as you're happy with the results and the horse is doing what you want, that's the biggest thing.
That's so cool. And so let's talk just a little bit about when you started working for Gary. So you had this 70-acre ranch to manage with 10 horses. What 10 horses did he have there at the time? What breeds was
They
he?
were the Costa Sensei de Pasos.
Yeah,
And he had one Peruvian mare, and she was about wild as a March hare. Every time we had to breed her or trim her feet or worm her, we had to rope her, because there was no catching her. She was, and we had several babies out of her, and the babies were phenomenal, but she was just a pain in the butt to deal with. And so he had a 6 stall barn that he had the studs in, and then everything else was just turned out.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so we just kind of spent a couple years getting everything organized and situated and changing things and making it work from a better place.
And how was it? So I assume when you met his Costa Senseis, that was the first time you'd come across that breed in
Absolutely,
your
yes.
life. I know probably by then there were maybe a few other barns that had them in the United States, but I know he was the very first person to import them from Costa Rica into the US, but that was probably even long before then. So can you talk about that a little bit? When you first met the Costa Sensei, what was your first impression of the horse, of the breed? And
They were the thing about the Coaster Sensei is they're just so intelligent. They're just so easy to deal with. Like there was, a couple of babies that they had that had never had their feet touched. And, within 2 times of me doing their feet, they just stood there, let me do their feet, didn't kick, didn't bite, didn't paw. And, there's definitely some other breeds that, you're going to spend every day, working with and might get it done in a month.
Yeah.
And, Lane never really did very much to help that situation. He kind of had his own agenda on things. And so, like I said, they just, with the 2 times of just me messing with them, they're like, oh yeah, this is easy. I can do this.
Yeah.
And Mr. Gary had a white stallion. His name was Desiable, and I mean he was just a big, solid white stallion. And you bring him out, and he's prancing around, and it's like, oh wow, look at this horse, and learning to ride them, it was such a different thing because they're just so light, they're so in tune with you, so willing to just be wherever you want them to be and do whatever you want them to do, that it helped me with my other horses too, because I was willing to you know go to that, hey, let me be a little lighter here, let me kind of get them in my head and kind of let them be aware of what I'm looking for.
Yeah, that's so cool. There's a lady here in Australia that imported some over to Australia. She's known Gary and Dane for many, many years. And so she still does, I think, 2 or 3 stallions and 1 mare, I think, or maybe 2 mares. And she bred them, and then she would send, the babies off to like a horse breaker. Well, I say here in Australia, I'm not in Australia at the moment, but that's where I live. And the horse breakers didn't know how to work with, like, they would send them back to her and be like, these horses are dumb, we don't know what to do with them. Like, and she was trying to explain to them how different this breed was and how light, and basically the way Gary sort of taught me with these horses, and even what you've said just now and what she tried to tell the horse breakers in Australia, you've got to get in their head and almost ride them from that point. Is that something you've found with the breed as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. The more that you're willing to connect with them horses and be present and really kind of just give them a clear picture of what you're wanting, that they come along so much faster.
Yep.
We've had several people at the ranch come ride for us, and it's trying to watch them make a horse do it their way instead of being willing to change what they want to fit the horse. It makes a huge difference when you're willing to ask the horse instead of fight the horse. A lot of these guys want to make a horse do something instead of letting it, hey, what are you willing to do? And show me, hey, how do you want to learn this? Because some horses, need 7 days a week. Some horses need 2 days a week.
Yep.
I mean, it just kind of really depends on what you're looking at. And like the Coaster Senseis, we have one stud that, if you ride him 4 days a week, he is great. If you ride him 2 days a week, he is a fire breathing dragon. I mean, that's just his nature. And then we have another stud that if you ride him once a year, he's the same horse. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Wow. And so when you it's coming up 9 years now that you've worked with Gary, and like we said, so much has changed. But like, how has that been for you? Like, did you have like a plan? Did Gary give you a plan of like, this is what I want from this ranch? And like, can you just talk a little bit about any of that? And also, what does the ranch look like now? Like, we talked about 70 acres, 10 horses. Like,
Well,
what does it
so
look
the
like
ranch
now?
looks like now we have a little over 400 acres. We have about 86 head of horses.
Yep.
And then there's there's 120 head of black Japanese Wagyu cattle that we raise. And as far as Gary giving me a plan, there was never really a plan per se. He just kind of said, "Hey, I want to be able to do this, make it happen." Like I want to have a stud barn, so I designed a stud barn and we built it. And then we got to talking about having classes and doing stuff at the ranch and people coming out, and so I was like, well, we kind of need a place to be able to have these things if it's raining. So then we built a covered round pen, and then we built a little riding pen outside, and then we built a bigger one up on the hill, and then we got into a yearling operation for a little bit, and so I started dividing pastures and built a set of cow pens and set it up to where I could bring cows in, house them for a week, and then kick them out in pastures. And then Gary wanted to get into Wagyu cows, and so we switched over to the Wagyu, and we just got them turned out, raising babies and enjoying life.
Yeah. And like, what next? Like, what would you love to see the ranch like being known for in the world, or creating in the world? Like, what's your dream for it for next? So I think I was asking you about
Yeah, we were talking about what the future for the ranch, and so like my biggest thing is I want the ranch to be known for great horses, and I mean I want people to see the quality, that the Coaster Sensei brings, to the table. And so we started doing some out crosses, crossing with some saddlebreds, some Frisians, some quarter horses, crossed with some Peruvians. We've done a little bit of everything. And then, we've also started a cutting horse program. And so we've been, I've been showing some cutting horses, and then been raising some cutting horse babies, and just doing a little bit of everything. And so we've been really geared up going towards that goal. So just keep moving forward.
And how have you found like crossing the Costa Sensei with other breeds? Like, what sort of horses is that producing?
So like with the Frisian crosses, we're seeing those more as like a sport horse for jumping, dressage, stuff like that.
Yep.
And then like with the Peruvians, they're just a really great riding horse. They're very smooth, and you get a little more size out of them. I actually Miss Susie owned one, Salsa Puedes, that I actually did ranch rodeos on. I worked cows on, and he just would do anything that I wanted him to do.
Yeah.
He was a pretty great horse. And then we've got some quarter horse crosses that that I rope on, I day work on, and then we also have his mama was a Coaster Sensei quarter horse cross, and we bred her to a cutting stallion, and that colt's in training right now, and he's sure enough going to make a nice cutting horse.
Wow. And do you start the horses yourself, or do you send them away to get started?
So with all the stuff that we deal with the ranch, and everything we have going on, I usually send them off for their 2-year-old year, because they need more of a um, dedicated program.
Yeah.
And so I found a couple of guys that really fit my style, and kind of are willing to work with the horse instead of make the horse. And so it's been a very good deal. And so we send them off for the first year, and then I'll get them and kind of put the finishing touches on them, and go from there.
Cool. And what are your favorite things to do? Like, what is a day in the life of Cody like? Like, what do you love about, horses or life, or like what's your life like?
Well, so a lot of it is horses. I'm always either I'm roping, or we're riding the cutting horses, or I'm working cows. And I really do enjoy the cowboy side of life, where you're out there, pinning a set of cows, and taking an old pack of dogs, and letting them work, and your horse working good, and just kind of really, that's probably my happy place, being out there on the back of a horse and riding across the pasture, bringing cows across. Um, and I really enjoy roping. We try to rope quite a bit, and then riding the cutters. The cutting horses are just a totally different thing. It requires them to think a lot of their own,
Yeah.
and it's one of the few equine sports where the horses has to do most of it by themselves. When you get in there and you put your hand down, it's you're relying on that horse and trusting that horse. And so I think it's a really cool thing for people to learn how to ride a cutting horse, because when they learn how to ride a cutter, they learn how to trust any horse they have.
Wow. And just like circling back to like your childhood and looking at, because it's sort of how we sort of started this conversation and where we've ended up, it's almost like your dad really laid all of this groundwork for what you've become. Did you ever think as a kid, like, that riding and the things that you kind of learned inevitably be through being thrown on the back of all of these different horses, that this was what it would eventuate into?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. I never thought that. I mean, like I said, we show some cutting horses, and I ended up hauling for the world in 2022 and ended up reserve world champion. First time ever hauling a cutting horse for the world. And never would I have thought that that was possible, because we just rode horses. They weren't fancy cutting horses, or they got the job done, but they didn't do all the extra stuff that a cutting horse does. And so it took a lot of learning and improving on my skills in order to be a part of that. And so it definitely has been a great thing for me. I always thought that, oh, I'll maybe end up being a truck driver or something, because so that way I could afford my horses. I knew I was going to have a job that was kind of lenient on when I was there, and because
Yeah.
I can't remember a time in my life that I haven't had a horse.
Yeah.
I mean, even when I was, so broke that I didn't know what I was going to eat for dinner that night, but by God, my horse was standing out there in the pasture and he had a full belly. So,
It's so true. I just think it's so awesome, like how life works out, how, you had all of that groundwork. And even though it's completely different to, like you said, it's different to what you're doing now, but I think like what your dad exposed you to gave you that foundation of like
oh, 100%.
all of those things, like all of the not having the fear and the being confident and having the communication with the horse and like all of those things that are just vital across the board, no matter what you're doing with your horses. Like it was all there in place and ready for you when the
Oh, yes,
opportunities
ma'am.
came
And,
up.
and you know, a big shout out to Mr. Gary for believing in me and seeing the skills that I had and kind of pushing me to use them,
Yeah.
instead of just thinking, oh, everybody can do this. This is easy.
Yeah.
Because I mean, there's a lot of times like when we do our classes that I sit back and I'm like, this probably is harder than it feels for me, because I've done it since before I could walk almost, and so it definitely is an eye opener to be able to be involved in that stuff and see, actually how talented somebody can actually be without them realizing it.
Yeah. And I think that's definitely one of your capacities and capabilities. And I know you have many, but this thing now where you get to also discover yourself as like a teacher of people and instilling in them the confidence that you have with things, and where it gets to now be something where, like most people don't, even if they love horses like me, a lot of people don't have the opportunity to have a life like yours. But if we're willing to have horses in our lives, there's so much that someone like you can teach people, because you can take everything that you've learned over your lifetime and impart that on people, and it's
Yes.
truly such a gift. Yeah.
And it took a little while to learn how to, I mean, because I speak horse way better than I do person. And so, it took a while to learn how to be able to communicate what I see and feel in a horse to somebody that's not really looking at the same things that I do. And so it's been a big change in how I do things, because now I've learned to kind of communicate that to the people and say, okay, hey, this is what you're looking for. And
Yeah.
so
And empower them as well. Like you're so empowering to give people the information, but then you go and let them apply it. You just, I guess with your horses, it's probably the same thing. You don't micromanage things. You're like, here's the information. Why don't you go and give it a go and see what shows up for you? And then come back to me and let's,
yeah,
look at it again
because
and ask me questions.
to me, I tend to think that when people and horses, when they have to apply themselves and they make a mistake, and you say, hey, no, this is not how you do this. This is, and then they go apply it and they see the difference. That's when it really clicks. I
Yeah.
mean, I could tell somebody all day you're doing it wrong and then just keep there and babysit them. But when you let them actually go try it their way and then get them to try it your way and they see the difference, they're like, oh, that's why we do it that way.
That's very cool. Okay, I think I have two more questions and then I'll let you go. Is there, like, looking back over your life, is there a horse or two in particular that really have stood out as horses that have like had a big influence on you, or like a pivotal moment in your life where there was like a lot of change that came about through the relationship you had with that horse or horses?
Well, so there one horse, I called him Reddy. He was an outlaw. A lady gave him to him. I was 10 years old, and this lady showed up to the house, and she was like, "Hey, I got this horse, and I've sent him to 5 different trainers. None of them can get him rode. You know, he's bucked a lot of people off." She's like, "I don't want to just sell him because I don't want somebody to get hurt. Would you be interested in taking him?" I mean, and that's probably a little odd for people to hear somebody trying to give a 10-year-old a bronc, but that's what I did, and I was like, absolutely, I'll take him. And I got him, and I was riding him that afternoon. I mean, I didn't care. I saddled him and jumped on him, and he bucked around there and hollered and screamed, and I was like, buddy, you're gonna just have to get used to it because this is your new life. And she brought that horse to me on a Wednesday, and that Saturday I took it on a trail ride. And she was there, and she's like, you know, in amazement of how she's like, "How did you get that horse?" And I'm like, "Because I wasn't gonna sit there and pick at him. I just let him get his stuff figured out, and away we went." And I had that horse for a lot of years, and he taught a lot of people how to ride. And it's crazy to see, where one person wants to think a horse is no good and that it's going to hurt somebody, and then somebody else is like, "Ah, he's fine. Let's just figure it out."
Yeah.
And so that right there opened my eyes to a lot of things on horses that people were like, "Oh, this horse is no good." And so I've, kind of made a living taking horses that people say, "Oh, this horse will never be anything," and taking them and turning them into something.
Yeah.
And then, probably the other horse that's did a lot for me was Desiable. Mr. Gary Stallion, he was just such an amazing horse and taught me so much about being present and being aware and just how to not really overthink things and just go do. And, I think for that horse every day.
Yeah. That's amazing. And with Reddy, what breed of horse was he? Do you know? Or
He was a paint horse,
uh-huh. Uh-huh.
but, he didn't have papers
Yeah.
but
And I mean, like, just the way you described him, it's really like people, like how many people write themselves off or people write another person off because they're like, they're a piece of shit or they're no good. And all it takes is one person that can look at the horse or the person and be like, you know what? I think you're pretty good. I think you're all right.
absolutely.
And then it's like, it just changes the whole trajectory of their life. It's so cool.
Yeah.
Do you think you're going to compete again one day? Is that also a dream, like an
Yeah.
aspiration for you?
So, we're this year I'm kind of wanting to gear up to qualify for the World Series finals in Vegas, which is the team roping side. Um,
When
I
does that
bought a
happen?
little
When's that on?
in December, at the end of in December. So it goes on, I think the week before Vegas during the NFR or whatever.
Yep.
And so they have a bunch of qualifiers all around the states, and so I got a little horse that I bought that when I was on the movie set, the guy was like, "Oh, this horse is, kind of limping around. I don't know that he's going to be sound. I'm going to send him back to the guy that I bought him from." And I was like, "Well, I'll buy him from you." And so I ended up bringing him home and, started roping on him. And I've had probably 4 or 5 people try to buy him from me already just because he's such a great horse. And I mean, he's never taken a lame step once at my house.
Isn't
And
that
so
funny?
it,
Like,
it is. And so
oh my
I
God.
that little horse has been really cool, and so I want to try to get him qualified for the World Series finals and go
Wow.
do that and have fun. And
He's a quarter horse, obviously.
yes, ma'am.
Is it? It's only quarter horses they use in those in the
Um,
World Series,
yeah,
or
mostly. Some people ride just whatever. I mean, the roping side, unless you're doing like the roping horse fraternities and stuff, then they're pretty particular about papers and, all of that. But like as far as like the World Series or anything like that, it's whatever you have to rope on, you can go compete on.
Wow. And I mean, God, because I completely overlooked another huge part of your life. I mean, talk about someone that's like, you call yourself a ranch manager or something like that, but it's like you've got so many things on the go. And I don't know if we really have time to talk about it. So maybe we could really do another episode in a few weeks or a month or 2 months or whatever. But do you want to just really quickly talk? Because then I'd love to check in again and see where you're at. Do you want to really quickly talk about how you made an appearance on it's 1923.
1923.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was kind of a crazy deal. My vet called and was like, "Hey, I have this lady that does a lot of commercials and stuff, and she's looking for more of a Spanish breed horse for a music video." And he's like, "I know y'all have a bunch of them with the Coaster Senseis." And he was like, "Would y'all be willing to rent them out to do a music video?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And so I called Gary and said, "Hey, would you be okay if I did this?" He's like, "Absolutely." And so the lady called me and she was like, "Hey, this is what I have. There's a music video that's going to be done right outside of Brenham." She's like, "I can't really give you a whole lot of details because I'm not, but it's for that Thursday, and this was on Tuesday." She said, "Could you be there?" I said, "Yeah, I can make that work." And she's like, "Well, they want two dancing horses," and I was like, "Okay, well, what color do you want? Because we have all kinds of colors and this and that." And she's like, "Oh, well, just send me pictures." And so I sent her a list of horses, and so actually Desiable and another stud that we have, Kawhi, got to be a part of that music video, and that music video is out now. So I can say it was for Drake, the rapper. He bought a place out here, and
Wow.
we ended up doing a music video for him. And I showed up, and you know we did everything that we are supposed to do. And the lady was like, "Hey, you, I like the way that you work. I like the way you take care of your horses." And she was like, "I could really see, you being good at this. Would you be willing to do more stuff?" I was like, "Yeah, I'll do anything, if it makes money." And she she called me like a week later and was like, "Hey, um, there's a TV show coming to Texas that's going to be filming here for about 3 months. Um, they're needing wranglers to go kind of take care of the horses and feed and keep horses rode and then help the actors with the horses." I was like, "Yeah, I'll do it." And so a couple months went by, I didn't hear anything from it. So I just was like, well, they must have, got some other stuff going on. So I was making plans to do other things. And she called me and she's like, "Hey, do you still want to do the movie deal?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'll go do it." She's like, "Well, um, you're gonna fly out Thursday and go to Montana to the set of Yellowstone and pick up 10 head of horses and bring them back to Texas to use for 1923." And I was like, "Oh, okay, whatever." And so got on the plane and flew up there, and we spent a couple days up there on set for Yellowstone, just kind of riding the horses and getting used to them, because the guy's like, "Look, this is your string of horses. This is what you're going to be responsible of taking care of while you're down there. So you need to ride all of them, keep them going, doing this and that." And so I was like, "Okay, absolutely." So did that, loaded up, and drove back to Texas with the horses. And the lady that was one of the ladies that was in charge, I was unsaddling the horse, and she came. She said, "Hey, would you want to try out for a part or audition for a part?" And I'm like, "I mean, sure, why not?" And she was like, "Well, there's this one part of the TV show that Taylor Sheridan is wanting, somebody that actually can ride and, do those things to be this part." And so he said to, have the Wranglers audition. And she's like, they want somebody that, has the Texas draw or whatever. And I mean, I don't think I have an accent, but a lot of people say I do. But so I think there was 21 of us that auditioned for the part. And Cody Brown, which is the guy that flew to Montana with me to bring the 10 horses back, um, it was between me and him to get the part. And so the director couldn't decide which one of us he liked the best, and so he sent the videos to Taylor Sheridan, and Taylor was like, "I like this guy better. Let's use him." And so, I ended up getting a little small part in the first episode of the second season, and got to enjoy it and do something different that I never would have imagined doing in my life. So,
That's so cool. It's so cool. And when does it air? It's soon.
February 23rd here in the States.
Nice. That's so cool. And is it something you would like to do again? Was it?
I mean, I would do it again. Yeah. I mean, it was fun. And it pays really good. So
You need to get an agent or something. Is there someone you should get an agent and get them on? I mean, that shit is so popular now. Everyone's making.
But I mean, I don't know that I'd want to do it full time, but if they called me and said, "Hey, would you want to do this?" I'd probably do it, but I don't want to go.
Yeah, into that world.
Life. Yeah, I mean, I'd much rather ride horses and do what I do than go live in Hollywood and be some kind of movie star or something.
But you could live there. You could have a really big ranch in Texas.
Yeah. But then I wouldn't have time to ride my horses because I'll always be on set or something crazy. And
do you still wake up every morning excited to go and ride your horses and do things with your horses?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we get up in the morning, we feed and clean stalls, and then start riding horses, and then, work in the shop, fixing stuff. And I mean, there's always something to do. So I think that's my favorite thing about my life is nothing's ever the same. Like, I could never do a job where I had the same routine all day, every day. That would just be way too boring for me. Yeah.
That's so cool. Thank you so much. This has been
Absolutely.
such a fun conversation. And wherever you're watching the episode, I would like to show some videos of Gary's horse and some links to different things. Look out for Cody on the first episode of season 2 of 1923. That's so cool. And what next, my friend? It's like, geez, talk about creating a life you'd never dreamed of as a kid. I'm the same. I'm like, as I grew up freaking dirt poor as well. I'm like, to ever think I just bought a second horse here in Costa Rica, to ever think I'd own a horse of my own, let alone 2 that live on the opposite side of the world for me. So I definitely also have a lot to give thanks to Gary Douglas and access consciousness and all this stuff, because in the end, it's like, it's not that it was handed to me, and I'm sure it's the same for you as well, but he's the sort of guy, and this stuff's the sort of stuff that shows you that you're actually worth something. You're actually good. You're actually a valuable product in this world. And if you are willing to choose and dare to be brave with your choices, then who knows what could show up. It could be
absolutely no, and he has such a way of just giving you tasks to make you realize what actually you're capable of that other people probably aren't. Yeah,
and that you never gave yourself credit for, because you never really bothered to explore that part of yourself.
Yeah, because you just think, oh, well, this is easy for me, so it should be easy for everybody.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much, my friend. And also, hey, guys, if you're listening to this podcast, we have some more classes coming up too. So we just facilitated here in Costa Rica, myself, Cody, and Alison Cox, and it was friggin' awesome. Like, everyone's still talking about it. So we've lined up a couple of more classes. We're actually going to do one at the ranch that Cody manages in Brenham, Texas in October. So you can come. You don't need to have any prior horse knowledge. You can have a lot of prior horse knowledge. We're going to do 3 days. So I'll post all of that. And then we're going to do another one here at El Lugar in Costa Rica, which we didn't even talk about really during this podcast. So maybe we'll catch up again in a few months and do this all again. But thank you so much for your time on this episode, Cody. I'm super grateful for you, and just inspired and excited to see what you choose and create next.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, guys. See you next time.